Greetings at Cheating Story Lab. The email from my former partner arrived at 6:47 a.m. Cease communication. My legal representative has all events detailed. Keep your distance. In a Singapore hotel room, 8 hours ahead of Pacific time, I scrutinized my phone, struggling to comprehend her message. I'd been engaged on this task for 3 months. I hadn't made any contact with her whatsoever. In the following 2 days, a restraining order was delivered via international courier. The filed documents alleged that I had stalked Natalie Corrigan for 14 consecutive weeks, appearing at her workplace, trailing her car, sending intimidating messages from disposable phones, loitering outside her apartment at night. The evidence provided dates, times, and locations, an extensive schedule of purported incidents depicting me as a relentless ex-boyfriend, struggling to accept our separation. However, the issue was straightforward. I had been in Southeast Asia for every one of those dates. I am Adrian Voss. As a structural engineer with expertise in high-rise foundation systems, I was dispatched by my firm 3 months prior to supervise the initial phase of a luxury residential tower in Singapore. Initially planned as a 4-month assignment, my former partner Natalie and I had parted ways 2 weeks before my departure, following an 18-month relationship. She yearned for marriage and children within a year, whereas I prioritized this career opportunity. Although we parted amicably, I assumed. My friend Terrence, a family law attorney in San Diego, listened to the entire scenario and then posed a crucial question. Do you have evidence demonstrating your presence during those specific dates? I responded affirmatively. I possess my passport, work visas, flight records, hotel bills, time-stamped project photos. You can have copies of everything, I replied. Terrence interrupted. You'll need the physical copies and return for the court hearing. It appeared that this matter was not suitable for remote resolution. The court hearing is scheduled in 11 days, yet abandoning the project isn't an option for me. Restraining orders become part of public records, which could potentially affect background checks for employment, housing rentals, and personal relationships. So it's crucial to appear in court. I ended the call and promptly began documenting everything. My passport chronicles my travels, clearly entry into Singapore on February 3rd, no exit stamp until a trip to Bangkok in March, followed by another return to Singapore. This means I was absent from the U.S. for the entire period Natalie alleged I was harassing her. I scrutinized my phone records, credit card statements, work logs, and project photos with date and GPS metadata. Every piece of evidence supported the same truth. I was 8,500 miles away. However, as I organized everything, a more troubling question surfaced. Why would Natalie falsely accuse me? Our relationship had been positive. The split was mature, sad, but amicable. A week after my departure, she texted me expressing hope for the Singapore project's success. What had shifted? What could lead her to concoct a whole tale of stalking? I contacted my site manager and shared the predicament. Although he was displeased by my mid-project exit, he empathized. I arranged a flight back to San Diego, arriving 2 days prior to the hearing. The day I touched down, I met Terrence at his office. He had already laid out the entire restraining order filing on his conference table. The specifics were troubling. Natalie alleged that I appeared at her gym on February 10, 17, and 24, followed her car to a restaurant on Valentine's Day, sent threatening texts from unknown numbers on February 19, March 3, March 10, and March 17, and was spotted outside her apartment building on 17 distinct occasions. Terrence remarked that it was elaborate. These weren't vague insinuations. He presents precise dates, times, and accounts of your supposed attire. I can discredit each point, I stated, placing my passport on the table. Observe the entry stamp dated February 3 with no exit until March 15 when I flew to Bangkok, then back to Singapore on March 18. Physically, it was impossible for me to have been at her gym on any of those dates. Terrence scrutinized the passport, then raised his gaze. What troubles me is this. She knew about your presence in Singapore. She was aware of your work assignment. Why would she submit something so easily debunked? I'm not sure. Perhaps she didn't anticipate my return for the hearing. Maybe she thought I'd simply accept it remotely. Or possibly, Terrence mused slowly, someone else compiled this evidence, an observation that struck like a blow. What do you imply? These legal filings demand meticulous organization and specific formatting. Those who file restraining orders are often emotional. Their paperwork is typically vague and inconsistent in timing. Tapping the document, he said, this was put together by an experienced hand. Listed as her lawyer is Bradford & Chen, a firm in La Jolla. Pulling out his laptop, Terrence began searching. Intriguingly, Bradford and Chen are known for aggressive divorce tactics, despite their specialization in family law. He pondered why Natalie would require such a firm for a restraining order against an ex-boyfriend. Unless, he mused, she's planning something more extensive. For instance, a lawsuit alleging emotional distress, harassment, or defamation. A restraining order is the first step. It classifies you as a potential danger in public records. Subsequently, she sues for damages, therapy costs, relocation expenses, and compensation for pain and suffering. You settle to put an end to it because fighting it proves costlier than compensating her. The puzzle pieces fell into place. She's attempting to extort money. It's a familiar pattern. Strategize against someone with considerable possessions, initiate a restraining order with alarming accusations, subsequently employ publicly available records to drive a settlement. The majority tend not to have rock-solid alibis like you possess. The majority capitulate. A surge of anger welled up within me, yet it was chillingly focused. She selected an adversary poorly. Indeed, Terrence concurred. Here's our strategy. We won't disclose your alibi before the hearing. Instead, let her legal team present their entire case, allowing them to construct their narrative. Natalie will testify under oath about these alleged incidents. Then we'll meticulously dismantle it. Why not provide the passport as evidence ahead of time? Because if we do, they'll withdraw the petition and try another approach. However, if Natalie lies under oath, if she swears on that stand that she witnessed you at places where you undeniably weren't, that's a criminal act. That alters everything. The appointment was set for 2:00 p.m. on a Tuesday at the San Diego County Courthouse. Terrence and I arrived at 1:30 p.m., each holding a folder containing my passport, work documents, flight records, and project photographs. We waited in the corridor for our case to be announced. At 1:50 p.m., Natalie and her attorney, Margaret Bradford, a polished woman in her 50s, appeared. Natalie seemed anxious, while Margaret exuded self-assurance. They didn't notice me at first as I was seated behind a column. When Natalie finally spotted me, she paled, grabbed Margaret's arm urgently, and whispered anxiously. Margaret glanced at me, frowned, then pulled Natalie aside for a quiet discussion. I couldn't make out their words, but Natalie shook her head while Margaret seemed to be comforting her. Terrence leaned over to say, "She didn't think you'd come? Good." At 2:07 p.m., we were summoned into the courtroom. Judge Patricia Hendricks oversaw the proceedings, a no-nonsense woman in her early 60s with a reputation for efficiency. The bailiff administered the oath, and Margaret Bradford commenced her argument. "Your Honor, my client Natalie Corrigan is requesting a restraining order against Adrian Voss, her ex-boyfriend. Over the last 14 weeks, Mr. Voss has engaged in a relentless pattern of stalking and harassment, causing my client significant emotional distress." Margaret detailed the allegations meticulously, reading from the submitted documents with practiced accuracy. Each incident sounded increasingly alarming, ranging from surprise visits, anonymous calls, to nighttime surveillance. She portrayed Mr. Voss as someone who had become dangerously unstable following the breakup. Miss Corrigan has documented 17 distinct instances where Mr. Voss showed up at her residence, Margaret added. 1. Statements from her roommate, colleague, and brother have implicated Mr. Voss' peculiar behavior and vehicles resembling his car. Terrence remained quiet, taking notes without opposition. I held my composure, knowing what lay ahead. Judge Hendricks scrutinized the documents before looking at me. "Mr. Voss, are you being represented by counsel today?" he asked. "Yes, Your Honor, Terrence Morrison is here for the respondent." "Mr. Morrison," the judge continued, "does your client wish to counter these accusations?" Terrence rose. "We do, Your Honor, but we'd like Miss Corrigan to testify about the specific incidents she claims occurred first." Margaret appeared momentarily surprised. Typically, respondents either agree to restraining orders or contest them promptly. Requesting the petitioner's testimony was unconventional. Judge Hendricks nodded in agreement. "Miss Corrigan," he instructed, "please step up to the witness stand." Natalie walked over, took the oath, and sat down. 2. Witness statements from her roommate, work companion, and brother highlighted Mr. Voss' odd activities and cars resembling his. Terrence remained mute, taking notes instead of protesting. I managed to remain calm, knowing what was about to happen. Judge Hendricks studied the papers, then looked at me. "Mr. Voss," he asked, "do you have legal representation today?" "Yes, Your Honor, that's Terrence Morrison for the respondent." "Mr. Morrison," the judge continued, "does your client intend to refute these allegations?" Terrence stood up. "We will, Your Honor, but we would first like to hear Miss Corrigan's testimony regarding the incidents she claims took place." Margaret seemed taken aback. Normally, defendants either accept restraining orders without question or contest them immediately. Requesting the petitioner's testimony was uncommon. Judge Hendricks nodded in understanding. "Miss Corrigan," he commanded, "kindly take the stand." Natalie walked over, took an oath, and seated herself. Natalie appeared both uneasy and resolute. Margaret guided her through the sequence of events, commencing with their separation. "Could you elaborate on what transpired following your split with Mr. Voss?" Margaret inquired. "We parted ways in early February," Natalie responded. "It was challenging for Adrian as he was unwilling to acknowledge it. He continued texting me, pleading for a conversation and another opportunity. This was the first falsehood. Our separation was mutual, and I was the one departing, specifically bound for Singapore." "When did the harassment initiate?" Margaret inquired. "Approximately a week after our breakup, I began noticing his car near my apartment. At first, I thought it was mere coincidence, but then it recurred. He would park along the street when I left for work, and he would appear at my gym." "Could you elaborate on a particular event that occurred on February 10th? At around 7 p.m., I was at my gym and noticed a man standing across the room, staring at me from afar. I felt terrified and left immediately." Under oath, she testified about this incident on February 10th. "That day, I had been in a site meeting in Singapore in the morning and had dinner with the project director later that evening. I have photos from that dinner time-stamped." Moving forward, another instance occurred on February 14th. Dining with friends at a restaurant in North Park, we saw Adrian parked outside the restaurant when we left. He followed us for several blocks before turning off, and my friends also observed this. On February 14th, I was touring a concrete testing facility outside Singapore with the structural team. I signed documentation and filed a project report that day. Lastly, regarding electronic harassment, Margaret inquired. "Messages started arriving from unknown numbers containing threats like, 'I can't be evaded and you'll regret this.' I was certain it was Adrian. No one else could have sent them. Did you save those messages? I erased them as they frightened me. But I noted down the dates and times, thinking it was useful not having any tangible proof of the texts, just her word." The testimony lasted for 20 minutes. Natalie recounted incident after incident, each one vividly detailed. She seemed to have been coached. She spoke about the mental strain, the anxiety, the sleepless nights, and the dread of leaving her apartment. She talked about altering her gym membership and changing her route to work. When Margaret concluded, Judge Hendricks looked at Terrence. "Mr. Morrison," he said, "your witness." Terrence then stood up, brandishing a single document. "Ms. Corrigan, this is your testimony," he declared. 10th of February is when Voss showed up at your gym, correct?" "Yes." "Was he tailing your car on the 14th of February as well?" "Yes." "And were there several occurrences throughout February and March where you personally observed him near your apartment or workplace?" "Yes, at least 17 times. Are these dates accurate?" "Absolutely, I have records." "Thank you," Terrence addressed the judge. "I'd like to present Exhibit A to the court." The passport he gave to the bailiff was delivered to Judge Hendricks. He also handed copies to Margaret and Natalie. "This is Voss's passport," Terrence stated calmly. "If you examine the visa pages, you'll find an entry stamp for Singapore on the 3rd of February, an exit stamp for a weekend trip to Bangkok dated March 15th, and a return stamp to Singapore on March 18th. There is no departure stamp from Singapore to the United States until April 9th, which was yesterday." The courtroom fell silent. Judge Hendricks scrutinized the passport meticulously, leafing through its pages. Margaret Bradford's countenance shifted from self-assured to ashen. Natalie remained motionless within the witness box. "Miss Corrigan," Terrence stated, maintaining an even tone, "how could Adrian Voss have been present at your gym on February 10th when he was in Singapore?" I must have mixed up the date. You swore under oath that all events were meticulously documented and you were certain of the dates. How could there be errors regarding 17 separate incidents? Perhaps it wasn't him. Then why did you secure a restraining order specifically against him? Why was your attorney presenting detailed testimony about specific dates and locations where you alleged encounters with Adrian Voss? Voss, Natalie looked at Margaret urgently. Margaret, engrossed in the passport, was visibly changing her expression. She had realized her client had committed perjury on a grand scale, and she had unwittingly assisted in presenting it to the court. Judge Hendricks laid down the passport. Her expression was displeased. Miss Bradford advanced towards the bench, and so did Mr. Morrison. The lawyers moved forward. The discussion was quiet, but I could discern Judge Hendricks' physical demeanor. She was enraged. Margaret attempted to clarify something, waving papers, but Judge Hendricks interrupted her with a firm motion. Upon returning to their places, Judge Hendricks addressed the courtroom. "I will state what seems clear to everyone here. Mr. Voss could not have perpetrated the described acts of stalking and harassment in the filing because he was not in the country during the given time frame. The passport evidence is conclusive and backed up by immigration records. She fixed her gaze on Natalie. Miss Corrigan, you have sworn to facts that could not have transpired. That is perjury, a criminal act. Immediately rejecting the request for a restraining order, Natalie's case will be forwarded for investigation by the district attorney's office. Judge Hendricks questioned further. Does your client intend to file any counterclaims, Mr. Morrison? Terrence affirmed with a nod, revealing plans for defamation, malicious prosecution, and emotional distress claims. Additionally, they aim to request legal fees and damages due to Mr. Voss being compelled to abandon his work in Singapore amid these unfounded accusations. Judge Hendricks warned, Miss Bradford, be cautious about your client testifying falsely in this court. The hearing has ended, and upon leaving the courtroom, I overheard Natalie disputing with Margaret in the hallway. Natalie expressed, you said you had witnesses, you mentioned your brother saw him, you claimed to have the texts. I assumed he wouldn't return, thinking he would accept it. You lied under oath in front of a judge, Margaret retorted sharply. I cannot continue representing you. I am withdrawing from your case immediately. Terrence and I passed them without speaking. Outside the courthouse, I could only breathe after holding my breath. What's next? I asked. Now we wait for the district attorney to decide if they will press charges, Terrence replied. Perjury cases can be difficult to prove, but this one is almost guaranteed. She testified to 17 specific false incidents under oath. The passport serves as indisputable evidence. I'd say there's a high chance they will prosecute and our counterclaim. This case seems to be straightforward. She filed a baseless restraining order with malicious intent. You have suffered quantifiable losses, including flight expenses, legal fees, and potential harm to your professional standing if the case had proceeded. A minimum settlement in the mid-5 figures is anticipated, potentially escalating to 6 figures if the case goes to trial and proves her attempt at extortion. Looking back at the courthouse, I could see Natalie on a bench with her head in her hands. While a part of me felt pity for her, considering what had led to this was clearly disastrous, the larger portion of me was enraged. She falsely accused me of stalking in public records, misusing the legal system for financial gain or revenge, and she did so assuming I wouldn't defend myself. 3 weeks later, I was informed that the San Diego district attorney had opted to charge Natalie with perjury and filing a false police report. Both charges were misdemeanors, but carried potential imprisonment and significant fines. The third lawyer hired since Margaret withdrew proposed a plea deal, simultaneously offering settlement terms for our civil lawsuit. Initially, Natalie offered $15,000, which was countered by Terrence at $125,000. The settlement amount agreed upon was $87,000. This included a written admission from Natalie acknowledging the falsehood of her stalking accusations and an apology for the damage inflicted. This statement would be submitted as part of the settlement to form a court record, thereby clearing my name publicly. Additionally, as part of the settlement, Natalie agreed to admit guilt to criminal charges, receiving 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and mandatory counseling. Following this, I returned to Singapore, completed my project, and the construction proved durable, capable of withstanding earthquakes up to a magnitude of 7.5 and typhoon-force winds for a century. Before leaving San Diego for the second time, I collected the final settlement documents from Terrence's office. He gave me an envelope containing a check and Natalie's written apology. Have you ever pondered why she did it? Terrence inquired. I've given that question considerable thought. In fact, I had hired a private investigator to examine Natalie's finances after the hearing. His findings were revealing. She had amassed $40,000 worth of credit card debt within 3 months following our separation, on new car leases, luxury apartment upgrades, and shopping sprees. She was living beyond her means and urgently needed money. She was broke, I replied. She assumed she could extort a swift settlement from me. Many would have paid merely to avoid the trouble. However, she hadn't anticipated my having an unassailable alibi. Fortunate you were abroad at the time, he commented. I was fortunate that I kept my receipts, I countered. That night, I returned to Singapore. Somewhere over the Pacific, I took out my laptop and looked at the project photos, focusing on the deep foundation. Steel reinforcement grids, concrete foundations for a 52-story tower, precise engineering demanded meticulous measurements, calculations, and validated assumptions. Natalie had constructed her case on assumptions and falsehoods. She assumed I wouldn't record my journeys. She assumed I wouldn't return to contest the charges. She thought a restraining order was just bureaucratic paperwork uncontested, but she erred in every instance. The structure we built together in Singapore would stand for a century. Natalie's fabricated allegations crumbled in under half an hour. I flipped through my passport once more, gazing at the Singapore entry stamp. That inconspicuous ink mark, easily missed, had carried more weight than any fake evidence she'd concocted. It was straightforward proof of a straightforward fact. I wasn't present, and sometimes the best defense is just the truth, authenticated and irrefutable. The aircraft moved westward, tracking the sun to Singapore. I shut my passport, closed my laptop, and enjoyed a peaceful sleep for the first time in a month. The legal ordeal had ended, my name was cleared, and apparently in San Diego, Natalie was experiencing a tough lesson about consequences. Justice often doesn't stem from clever debates or sensational disclosures. At times, it emerges from something as straightforward as presenting a passport and allowing the facts to unfold. I never received another message from Natalie.